Are we live? Welcome everyone to the May Ordinary Council meeting of Norfolk Island Regional Council. I'd like to start the meeting by calling on the General Manager to read the statement of respect. Mr. General Manager.
The Norfolk Island Regional Council promotes a climate of respect for all. We endeavour to inspire in our community shared civic pride by valuing and protecting our unique culture and the environment, both natural and built, for the current and future generations. We, the administrator and staff of the Norfolk Island Regional Council, undertake to act with honesty and integrity, to conduct ourselves in a way that engenders trust and confidence in the decisions we make and the actions we take on behalf of the Norfolk Island community. We acknowledge the Norfolk Island people, the traditional custodians of this island.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. For the record, I ask if there are any apologies for this meeting.
No.
And Mr. General Manager, I want to disclose of interest.
No, there was not.
I asked the meeting to note condolence list for this meeting. Council has been notified of the recent death of Duncan Sanderson on the 28th of April 2021, whose funeral is occurring this afternoon. And I ask that a moment of silence be observed. And I'll now move to item 5.1 on today's agenda, which is the minutes of the council meeting held on the 7th of April 2021. Mr. General Manager.
Minutes was meeting held on the 7th of April before you, and I'm sure an accurate record of that meeting.
Thank you. I resolve that the minutes of the council meeting held on the 7th of April 2021 be received and confirmed, and I'll move to item 6, public access. Mr. General Manager, are there any requests for public access?
There was no request this month.
Thank you. I also note that there is no mayoral minute on the agenda this month, nor are there any standard status reports, reports from committees, reports from the General Manager, or reports from the Manager of People and Culture. That brings the meeting to item 12, reports from the Manager of Corporate and Finance, and the first of those is item 12.1, the investment report. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. Before you is the investment report for March 2021, and it shows on page 27 an unrestricted cash amount of $3,160,845. In addition, Council holds funds in trust of $1.1 million as of 31st of March. Total restriction of funds is $3.7 million. The report's there for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. I resolve that the Council notes the investment report for March 2021, and I move to item 12.2, the 2021-22 land rate model. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. Before you is a report that has appeared every year, and this is noted from previous years, but I'd like to just run over some important parts of this report. It's quite detailed, runs over several pages. The land rate model that's before you is based on section 497 of the Act, which details the way in which a levy may be calculated. And it runs along the lines of a rate, whether an ordinary rate or a special rate, may, at council discretion, consist of an ad valorem amount or be a base amount to which an ad valorem amount is added. Council also, under section 493 of the Act, outlines 4 categories of properties that could be rated or may be rated, which are residential, business, farmland and mining. As we have no mines here on Norfolk Island, Council has 3 categories, being residential, business and farmland. Mr Administrator, the adopted long-term financial plan of Council from 2020 to 2029 makes the assumption that there will be an annual increase in the rating yield of 1.5% in the plan timeframe. In determining what the rating yield will be for 21-22, the Council has to consider the following. It needs to, 1, consider improving the Council's financial sustainability, 2, reducing backlogs for maintenance and renewal of Council assets and infrastructure, and 3, maintaining and enhancing services to meet the needs of the community. It should be noted that council laws have been suspended for a period of 6 months due primarily to the financial position we are in. Council is now subject to a public inquiry. Council's financial sustainability is uncertain into the foreseeable future, with minimal cash reserves on hand. In the short term, it is incumbent on Council, as a minimum, to try and maintain existing services to meet the needs of the community. From Council's perspective, a proposed 1.5% increase, as in previous years, would not be sufficient to meet this requirement, let alone maintain and renew Council's assets and infrastructures. At this point in time, it is imperative for Council's financial viability that significant steps are taken to start improving our revenue streams and provide evidence to our regulator that we are taking necessary actions. The following considerations are made here, Mr Administrator. 1. Council's obligations to build cash reserves to be able to continue to provide services to the community. 2. A degree of catch-up required due to applying variable per annum increases and, in some cases, a decrease in previous years. 3. Partial recognition that is almost certainly a significant disparity between the Australian CPI and the Norfolk Retail Price Index, where increasing the rates yield by an Australian CPI equivalent of 1.1% does not reflect the true increase in costs on Norfolk over the 4 years. 4. Council almost certainly would have been insolvent if it wasn't for a $3 million cash injection by the Department in December 2020. 5. A 1.5% increase barely covers inflation. 6. A 5% increase will raise an additional $60,000. 7. A 10% increase will raise an additional $120,000. So this report, Mr Administrator, we are therefore recommending an increase of 10% for 21-22. The increase in the rating yield percentage being proposed in the 21-22 year only as part of the preparation of the 21-22 budget. The Council's existing long-term financial plan will need to be updated. This will include a review of the assumptions that are used to develop the financial plan forecast, such as future rate yield percentages. It is anticipated to present this to Council by December. Council will also investigate the re-establishment of the calculation and reporting of the Islands Retail Price Index. Over the next several pages, Mr Administrator, are a number of tables that detail the 3 proposed options for your consideration, and it's also broken down into a number of categories that details the increases under option 1 of 1.5%, of 5% and 10%. It shows what the base rate will be, and it shows what the multiplier, which is the ad valorem rate, that will be applied. On page 34 of the report, there's a very important table there for your consideration. It shows a comparison of the annual increases across each of the options. And we show a residential valuation varying from $50,000 through to $400,000, which is the unimproved land value. We show the number of properties, and we show what we currently levy against that property. And then we show what the increase will be under option 1 at 1.5%, option 2, which is 5%, and option 3, which is the one we're recommending, a 10% increase. So an average property price across the island is less than 150,000 unimproved land value, and this will represent around about $50 to $60 increase per acre. The conclusion for you to consider here, Mr. Administrator, is the proposed models meet legislative requirements and are considered to fairly distribute the burden of land rates across the 3 rating categories. For 2021 and 22, Council is obliged to consider increasing the rate and yield percentage, as with all council fees and charges, to assist in building up cash reserves to maintain existing services for the community and replace ageing infrastructure. The recommended rates yield percentage for 21-22 is 10%, and that this model be placed on public exhibition for a period of 28 days. Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. I note that in what you have just said, you covered the typical increase were I to adopt the 10% recommended rate increase for residential properties. There are 2 other categories of properties which rates will be applied to in the coming year, that is the business category and the farmland category. And I realise that you have provided me with a table this afternoon of the typical increases that would flow to both of those categories in dollar terms if a 10% rating increase was applied. And I just wonder if you could just restate what the typical dollar increase would be for the business category and for the farmland category.
Yes, Mr. Administrator, and I think we should table those reports to be included for distribution so the community can see these. But in the business category, the majority of properties that valuation is less than 150,000, and 150,000 land value will see an increase between the smallest one, 50 to 150, you'll see an increase of $96 to $150 for properties within that range. For farmland, this is spread a lot larger area, but the majority of properties valuation is less than $300,000. A $300,000 property increase will be $57 for the year.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. I've had the opportunity to read your report on this matter and also to look at the typical impacts on the various categories of rate assessments. That's the residential category, the business category and the farmland category. And I've made some notes which I intend to table and have incorporated into my resolution this afternoon. The report before me today observes that the current suspension of NIRC's elected governing body is due primarily to the financial position that Council is in. And the Council's financial sustainability is uncertain into the future, with minimal cash reserves remaining on hand. As a result of recent overspending patterns, one of which involved the additional allocation of approximately $4.8 million to the airport runway reseal project, NIRC's working capital is substantially depleted. It is stated in the report that in the short term, it's incumbent on NIRC as a minimum to try and maintain existing services to meet the needs of the community. In reviewing NIRC's 2019-2020 financial statements, Council's auditor has expressed concerns about NIRC's continuing status as a going concern. These things tell us that something must change for NIRC to be financially sustainable into the future. The small percentage rate increases adopted in recent years were insufficient to maintain service levels, let alone to renew NIRC's ageing and failing assets to the extent now required. Significant steps need to be taken to start improving NIRC's revenue streams and to provide evidence to the Commonwealth on which so much reliance has been placed for bailout assistance that NIRC itself is taking necessary actions to rectify its financial position. NIRC needs to start rebuilding its cash reserves immediately, to start renewing its failing assets, and to continue providing adequate services to the community. A degree of catch-up is required after several years in succession of inadequate rate increases. I'm being told that NIRC would by now be insolvent, but for the unplanned $3 million cash injection received from the Commonwealth in December 2020. Councils elsewhere in Australia do not have the luxury of a government agency coming to their rescue with endowments on the scale seen here. It cannot be presumed that the government bailout that occurred here will occur again without NIRC showing a preparedness to improve its efficiency and the community shouldering a fair share of the costs. We know that the long-planned rate increase of 1.5% barely covers inflation, that a 5% increase will raise an additional $60,000, and that a 10% rate increase will raise an additional $120,000. In the circumstances, a 10% rate increase has been recommended. I've noted that a 10% rate increase will add $50 to $60 to the typical residential rate bill in 2021-2022. Although I'm cognizant that any increase will impose unwelcome pressure on ratepayers, from today's report and from my own review of NIRC's financial position, I'm persuaded that the recommendation in this report should be adopted. I'm also of the view that NIRC must also commit to a program of continuous improvement aimed at delivering efficiency gains, and I think it is not unreasonable to aim for gains of 5% in that regard in 2021-2022. With these matters in mind, I hereby resolve as follows: that Council 1 endorses the placing of the proposed 2021-2022 rating model with a yield percentage increase of 10% on public exhibition for a period of 28 days, as detailed in the table printed on page 36 of today's agenda. 2, note that the increase in the rating yield percentage being proposed for 2021-22 and as part of the preparation of the 2021-22 budget, the Council's existing long-term financial plan will be updated to include a review of the assumptions that are used to develop the financial plan forecasts, such as future rate yield percentage increases, and that this report be presented to Council at its December ordinary meeting. 3, asks the General Manager to investigate re-establishment of the calculation and reporting of the island's retail price index to be used as a reference for calculating future rating yield percentages and council fees and charges. 4, implements a continuous improvement program aimed at delivering 5% in efficiency gains across the organisation in the 2021-2022 budget, to be reported to Council by 30 September 2021. And 5, that my comments made now on this subject be recorded in the minutes of this meeting. So resolved. And I'll move to item 13.1 relating to the Marine Parks Project Survey Results Report. Mr. General Manager.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator.
Okay, I've just been informed that the funeral procession will be passing the council chambers in a few moments. So I propose to adjourn the meeting and return in about 15 minutes after the funeral procession has passed. We adjourned the meeting for the passing of the funeral procession, and we were at item 13.1. So, Mr. General Manager, can I take you back to that point of the meeting, please?
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. Before you is Marine Parks Project survey results that is undertaken between the 1st and the 21st of March to understand the barriers that community experience and their ability to reduce the environmental impact. Information gathered from the surveys assist council to develop key objectives with multimedia campaigns and assisting in the strategic waste management planning of the island. Some interesting statistics in here for the community, if they'd like to go and read, which are covered over a couple of pages. The three standout issues which surfaced during the community surveys were: 1, burning of waste at headstone should cease as soon as possible; 2, until such time the headstone burning is ceased, close monitoring of waste and better burning practices should occur at headstone; and 3, banning single-use plastics, shopping bags, drinking straws, bottles, plastics, bowls, is heavily supported. Reports there for your notation, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager, and I too commend to the community that they have a look at that report on today's agenda and some of the statistics that came out of that survey. And I resolve that the Marine Parks survey results report be noted, and I'll move to item 13.2, which is the Norfolk Island Liquor Bond Sales Performance Report. Mr. General Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. A short report that just shows the volumes of sales, and there's an increase for the month of March 2021 as compared to March 2020 of 34%, but the year-to-date total is actually down 2.8%. So, the report's just there for your notation.
And is my understanding correct that some of the reason for that substantial increase relates to the buy-up after the store was
the last delivery?
emptied out, there was a delivery, and people need to catch up on their stock? Okay, so that's not necessarily reflective of what might happen on a month-to-month basis.
Yes.
But it's still an improvement. So I'll resolve that council notes the Norfolk Island Liquor Bonds performance to date. And I'll move to item 14.1, which is the final report on handover of the Workers' Compensation Scheme, external audit finding number 113. Mr. General Manager.
Mr. Administrator, as you rightly point out, this was a finding from external audit findings that we've adopted to finalise the handover from council who was managing the Workers' Compensation Scheme and transferring it to Gallagher Bassett. The administration was transferred to them on the 4th of January this year, as per the contract that was signed between the department and Gallagher Bassett. A completion of financial reconciliations and determinations of the financial position wasn't feasible at that time of handover just because of operational issues and timing issues. So it's taken us a little bit of time, but we're now at the point where final reconciliations are there. It's being reported to the FCA and the acquittal process, and the report's here for your notation.
Mr. General Manager, can you explain to me, in terms of exposure beyond the handover date, is council exposed to any outstanding liabilities of the scheme? So from handover, the new regime takes responsibility for past and future claims?
Yes.
Thank you. I resolve that council notes the information provided in the report, and I'll move to item 14.2, which is the services update.
Administrator, it's a short report, just shows that work is continuing on building maintenance and refurbishment of BCA number 3, and the other highlight here is cleaning up of gravel that sits at 44.8, and we've managed to screen 500 tonne of rock from old road base that has been sitting there for a while, which is now being used for Morris and Prince Philip Drive.
Thank you. I resolve the council notes the information provided in the report, and I'll move to item 15.1, which is the planning and environment update.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. This is a very detailed report. Shows detailed information around development applications and building applications received in the month of April and that year to date, with comparisons to previous years. There's also a detailed report about the composter and the Telcor chipper machine being repaired at the Waste Management Centre. There's some information about waste exports and the car baler. More importantly, there's some updating information on the first point of entry requirements that we're working on, and the slow, the hold up of that project because of suppliers yet to be delivered.
The technical difficulty there, we just had some sound playing over the recording of the meeting. Mr. General Manager, you were talking about item 15.1.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. Just back on page 47 of the report, where we run through some public health information update there, and some environmental protection updates, especially on the Argentine ant eradication program, and other woody weed removal programs around the island. So as I say, Mr. Administrator, a very detailed report over several pages there, and that's there for your notation.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager. I resolve the council notes the information provided in the report and move to item 16.1 relating to records digitisation. Mr. General.
Thanks, Mr. Administrator. This has been a project that's been ongoing for a number of years, and something that we would really like to pursue. More importantly, because it was also found in our external audit findings recommendation number 35 about council resolving these digitisation of its records that we are currently storing across multiple sites that are not really compliant. Records administered by council are stored in 7 primary locations across the island. There are approximately 23,500 files of records here held in hard copy across 5 of these sites, and the 2 remaining sites are excluded from this campaign. Those records are quarantined. They have been identified as being likely contaminated with asbestos and will be dealt with in a separate process. So as you can see, there's a large number of files, and there are a large number of issues in having these number of physical records stored in hard copy format only, and the primary one being the high risk of damage and loss to this really valuable information. It's also an expensive way to store your records by having to store them in buildings and physically maintaining them. And also increased costs of resources to manage this volume of records. So if it continues to grow, we're going to continue to have to employ people to manage this. So to ensure the longevity of these records and to reduce the risk of loss of this information, a digitisation program is required. There are a number of ways that this can be done, but before you today is 2 options that are being proposed, both that have been costed out to show you. But in essence, in conclusion, council staff have tried consistently to obtain funding from the Department for the Digitisation of Records and the modification and/or creation of a building to better meet the requirements of the national archiving requirements. The grassroots audit conducted has clearly identified the records are an area of risk to council and that steps should be taken to manage this risk by building adequate facilities, digitising records and developing a retention schedule. To achieve this requires myself to assist in seeking funding as a matter of priority to ensure the longevity of the valuable records and reduce the risk to future records. Support will also allow council staff to achieve recommendation 5 that came from the grassroots audit, which has been adopted by council as a priority project.
The report talks about recommendation 35, and you just mentioned recommendation 5. 35. 35, okay. Okay, so I understand there are two options, but in order for council to pursue either, funding is required, and that's what the purpose of this report is, to establish a pathway towards obtaining funding. So I resolve that council authorise the general manager to seek funding for the 1, refurbishment of the current library to meet the standards of NIRC legislation, and 2, digitisation of records. And I'll move to item 17. Item 17 relates to notices of motion. There are no notices of motion. Item 18 relates to urgent business without notice. Mr. General Manager, is there any urgent business without notice? And item 19 relates to confidential matters for council's consideration. Are there any confidential matters?
There's no confidential matters this month.
Item 20 relates to questions for the next meeting. There are no questions. That therefore brings us to item 21. Before I close the meeting, Mr. General Manager, is there anything else that I need to deal with?
Unless you want to record your extension of 3 months.
Thank you. That's a good point. Just for the record, my engagement as interim administrator at council was for the period from the 5th of February to the 5th of May, 3-month engagement, and today is the 5th of May, and a week or so ago the Minister extended my appointment for a further 3 months, which will expire on the 5th of August. So that will mean by the 5th of August I have been in the role of council's interim administrator for a 6-month period. My understanding of the primary reason behind the extension is that the process of public inquiry is just ramping up now. Council business continues to need attention whilst that public inquiry process is ongoing, and this will provide further administrative arrangements for council until that process is completed. Just one other thing that I will mention in relation to the public inquiry, and this relates to today's business paper, is that today's paper, apart from one significant item dealing with rates, today's paper comprised largely a set of informational reports for notation. That's an unusual situation for a council meeting, and I think some explanation can be offered for why that has occurred, and it relates to the amount of staff time that has been tied up in preparing for the public inquiry. When it was measured for me more than a week ago now, over 500 hours of staff time had been spent on preparations, responding to summonses and subpoenas relating to the public inquiry, and that has distracted staff from the normal workflows. The workflows will return to normal once council gets over that hump of allocating resources to deal with the demands of the public inquiry. So you should expect to see a more detailed and comprehensive agenda for the June council meeting. Having said that, if there's no further business, Mr. General Manager, I'll close the meeting at 2:43 p.m. and thank everybody for their attention.